February 3rd, 2025, 6 in the morning, Fargo, North Dakota. It's 9 below zero, and the tents along the Red River Trail look like they've been punched from the inside. Collapsed poles, frost growing through the nylon so thick you could scrape it with a credit card. One guy's zipper froze shut around 2 a.m., and he had to cut his way out of his own shelter with a box cutter. 14 tents on that stretch of trail between First Avenue and the railroad overpass. By dawn, 11 of them had people in sleeping bags who weren't really sleeping. They were shaking. Some were crying. 2 had already walked to the warming center on 4th Street because staying horizontal was going to get them killed. And then there was the thing at the north end of the row. It sat on 2 rotting wooden pallets about 40 feet from the nearest tent. Looked like a fat wooden submarine had washed up on the riverbank, and somebody had draped a blue tarp over the back half. Cedar planks curved into a barrel shape, stainless steel bands around the outside catching frost. A door on one end, glass fogged from the inside. Smoke wasn't coming out of it. No generator humming next to it. No extension cord running to a power source. Corrine Schaffner was asleep inside. Not shaking, not crying. Asleep. At 9 below zero, in a structure with no electricity, no propane, no fire, no heat source of any kind besides her own body, Corrine Schaffner was at 51 degrees. 51 degrees in a box with no heater while everyone within earshot was freezing. And the answer to how that's possible is also the answer to a question most people have never thought to ask. What does a sauna actually do? Not what does the heater do, what do the walls do? Because the walls are the whole story. The heater was never the interesting part. Corrine didn't set out to live in a sauna. Nobody does. You don't draw that up on a napkin at the shelter and hand it to the caseworker like a business plan. She was 54 when Earl died. Pancreatic cancer. The diagnosis came in August of 2022, and by Thanksgiving, he was gone. They'd been married 31 years, which is a long time to share a thermostat with somebody, and then suddenly you're sharing it with no one. The house on Elm Street in West Fargo was a rental. Earl's disability checks stopped the week after the funeral. Corrine had done bookkeeping for a trucking company out by the interstate, but she'd quit 18 months earlier to handle Earl's appointments, his medications, the 12-hour days of keeping a dying man comfortable in a recliner he couldn't get out of without help. No income. No savings past about $900. The landlord gave her 60 days, which was more than he owed her legally. She sold what she could, kept a sleeping bag, a backpack, a plastic tub of Earl's flannels that she couldn't make herself throw away, and a Coleman camp stove she'd bought at a garage sale on 13th Avenue for $6. By February of 2023, she was in a tent. The tent was a Walmart Ozark Trail 4-person dome, green and gray. It cost $42, and it was exactly as warm as you'd expect $42 of nylon to be. She'd lie there at night listening to the fabric pop and crackle in the wind, feeling the cold come through the floor pad like the ground was reaching up to pull the warmth out of her. And that's exactly what was happening. She just didn't have the vocabulary for it yet. Here's the wrong explanation for why tents fail in winter. The one that most people carry around, and that sounds right until you scratch it. People think a tent fails because it's thin. Like the problem is the amount of material between you and the outside air, and if you could just add more material, you'd be warm. Thicker walls, more fabric, an extra rain fly. That's not wrong exactly, but it's incomplete enough to be useless, because thickness isn't the variable that matters. A cinder block wall is thick. A steel I-beam is thick. You wouldn't want to sleep leaning against either one in January. What matters is what the material does to heat as it tries to pass through. And nylon does almost nothing. A sheet of tent fabric has an R value that's so close to zero you'd need a decimal point and a lot of patience to measure it. R value is just a number that tells you how hard it is for heat to travel through something. Higher number, harder trip. Fiberglass insulation in a house wall runs around R13. A pane of glass is about R1. A nylon tent fly, R.A. joke. What the tent does is stop the wind. And that's it. That's the whole contribution. Once the wind stops and the air inside goes still, the tent has done everything it will ever do. Every degree of warmth in that space comes from you, from your body, and nylon gives that warmth about the same resistance as a screen door gives a mosquito. It slows it down for a second. Then it's gone. Corinne didn't know any of this during her first winter. She knew it was cold. She knew her hands hurt. She knew the sleeping bag rated to 15 degrees was a lie when the wind picked up at 3 a.m. and the tent walls started flexing inward. She made it to spring of 2023 by spending a lot of nights at the warming center and a lot of other nights not sleeping at all. Sitting upright in the tent, wrapped in Earl's flannels, drinking instant coffee she heated on the Coleman stove outside and then brought inside before it cooled. Tiny sips, making each cup last 40 minutes because the cup was the warmest thing she owned. Second winter, 2023 into 2024, she upgraded to a canvas Army surplus tent she got from a guy named Dale who was moving to Moorhead. That was better. Canvas insulates a little, maybe R1 on a generous day. She hung a wool blanket on the inside wall and stuffed wadded newspaper between the blanket and the canvas, which got her maybe another R2 on the wall she'd modified, and R0 everywhere else. She made it through that second winter, too. Barely. Lost a toenail. Woke up one morning in late January with her water bottle frozen solid inside the tent, inside the sleeping bag, next to her body. 13 hours of her body heat hadn't been enough to keep 16 ounces of water liquid. That's when something shifted. Not a plan. Just a refusal. She'd survived 2 winters by enduring them. The third one was going to kill her, where she was going to figure out why the cold kept winning. The sauna showed up in her life in September of 2024, and the way it happened was so ordinary, she almost walked past it. She was collecting cans along Main Avenue, south of where it crosses the railroad tracks. There's an industrial strip back there. Warehouses, a welding shop, a couple of storage places with chain link around them. One of the buildings used to be a spa supply distributor called Northern Relaxation Wholesale. The company had closed sometime in the spring. The sign was still up, but the parking lot was empty, and the windows were papered over from the inside. Behind the building, sitting on a pair of wooden shipping pallets next to a dumpster full of cardboard and shrink wrap, was a barrel sauna, 7 feet in diameter, 10 feet long, cedar staves running lengthwise, bent into a curve and held together with 4 stainless steel bands. The wood had gone silver gray on the outside from sitting in the sun and rain since at least the previous fall. A tempered glass door on one end, a round hole in the back wall where the stovepipe used to go, now just a ragged gap with some flashing peeling off around it. The heater was gone. Pulled out. Somebody had taken the Harvia stove, probably because it had copper and steel components worth money at the scrapyard. The wiring harness dangled from a hole in the interior wall like a dead vine. But the rest of it was there, all of it, and Corinne didn't know what she was looking at, not yet. She saw a big wooden tube and thought, that's a lot of cedar. That's a lot of clean, dry space. That's about the size of the tent. Maybe bigger, except the walls are wood instead of nylon and the whole thing is round, and there's a door that latches. She went inside. The smell hit her first. Cedar. Not the faint, polite cedar of a closet liner. A wave of it. Warm and sharp, almost peppery, like the wood was still breathing out oils that had been baking into it during the years it sat in somebody's showroom or warehouse running at 180 degrees. The interior walls were tongue-and-groove cedar planks, fitted tight, smooth to the touch. She sat down on the slatted bench that ran along one side. The bench was still solid. The wood under her palms was dry. And then she noticed something she hadn't expected. It was September. Maybe 60 degrees outside. Overcast. A little windy. Inside the barrel, with the door shut and no heat source running, it was warmer. Not by a degree or 2, by enough that she could feel it immediately. The wind noise dropped to almost nothing. The temperature difference between outside the door and inside the barrel was, she didn't have a thermometer, but she knew her body, and her body said, this is different. She sat in there for maybe 20 minutes. Thinking about Earl, thinking about the winter coming, thinking about the 2 toenails she'd lost and the mornings she'd woken up unable to feel her hands, and then she looked at the curved cedar walls around her and thought the thought that changed everything. What if this thing already is a shelter? What if it's been a shelter this whole time, and the heater was just a bonus? She went back 3 times that week before she decided to move it. The first visit was just to look around more carefully. She measured the inside by lying down in it, which is the kind of measuring tape you use when you don't have a measuring tape. Full body length, with room to spare at both ends, wide enough to lie across without hitting the opposite bench. 7 feet of diameter gives you a floor area. Well, it's not a rectangle. It's a curve, but the flat platform area where the benches used to sit was about 6 feet wide by 8 feet long, bigger than any tent she'd ever slept in. Second visit, she brought a flashlight and looked at the walls. This is where the story turns from a housing story into a physics story. And the physics is the reason the title of this video isn't "Widow Found a Broken Sauna and Froze Like Everyone Else." She pulled a loose piece of interior paneling near the stovepipe hole and saw what was behind it. Not just wood. Layers. The cedar paneling was the innermost surface, what you'd touch if you were sitting inside. Behind that paneling, maybe a 1/4 inch of air gap. Behind the air gap, a layer of aluminum foil stapled to the framing. Behind the foil, a thick bat of something gray and fibrous, packed into the space between the wall studs. Behind the bat, more cedar staves forming the exterior barrel shape. She didn't know the names for any of it, but she was looking at a wall assembly that a building contractor would recognize immediately. The gray stuff was mineral wool insulation, R13 to R15 depending on the thickness. The foil was a vapor barrier, the same reflective material used in house insulation, designed to bounce radiant heat back toward the interior. The cedar paneling itself adds another R1, or so, the exterior staves, another R1. Stack all of that up and the walls of that broken, heaterless, abandoned barrel sauna sitting in a parking lot behind a bankrupt spa company in Fargo, North Dakota, had an insulation value somewhere around R15 to R17. To put that in perspective, the minimum code for an exterior wall in a new house in North Dakota is R20. This sauna was close to residential wall code. A structure designed to keep 180 degrees of heat inside was now being asked to keep 9 below zero out, and the insulation didn't care which direction the heat was trying to go. Insulation doesn't have a preference. It resists thermal transfer in both directions equally. Kareen's Walmart tent had been R0. The canvas tent with the newspaper mod had been maybe R3 on one wall. This sauna was R15 everywhere, on every surface, floor, ceiling, walls, because saunas are insulated on every surface. They have to be, otherwise the heater would waste half its energy heating the ground underneath and the sky above. She was staring at a fully insulated room that someone had thrown away because the heater broke. Moving it was the hardest part. That barrel weighed somewhere around 1,600 pounds, and Kareen weighed 128. She couldn't move it, not by herself, not with a truck, which she didn't have, not with a dolly, which wouldn't support the weight. The thing was sitting on pallets, and it was going to stay on pallets unless she could figure out how to get it off the pavement and onto dirt 40 feet from where it sat now. She thought about this for 3 days, went back to her tent at night and stared at the canvas ceiling and worked the problem. Came up with nothing. The math didn't work. 1,600 pounds doesn't care about your determination. Then she met a man named Hal Gunderson at the Can Redemption place on University Drive. Hal was 63, lived in a van behind the Tesoro station, and had a construction background. Drywall mostly. She told him about the barrel. He said he'd come look at it. Hal looked at the barrel for about 45 seconds and said, "You don't move the barrel. You move where you live." The barrel was already sitting in a spot that was partly screened from the road by the warehouse building and a row of dead arbor vitae that the spa company had planted and never watered. The lot was fenced, but the gate was broken and the property was in foreclosure. Nobody was coming back. So she moved to the barrel, dragged her tub of Earl's flannels, her sleeping bag, her Coleman stove, and a plastic milk crate of supplies across Main Avenue and down the gravel strip behind the warehouse. Set up camp right there in the parking lot. Used the existing pallets as a raised floor under the barrel, which kept the cedar off the wet ground and created an air gap beneath that she'd later understand was doing something important. Hal helped her wrestle the barrel into a better position, angled so the door faced away from the prevailing northwest wind. They used a car jack and some scrap lumber to tilt it, then kicked wooden blocks under one side to keep it from rolling. Crude. It worked. That was October 11th, 2024. She had about 5 weeks before the first hard freeze. So the barrel is in place, the door shuts, the walls are insulated. Done. Right? Move in and wait for winter? Not even close. The sauna had 3 problems that Corrine hadn't anticipated. She found each one the hard way, and the order in which she found them tells you something about which problems matter most when you're trying to survive cold. Problem 1 was the stovepipe hole. That ragged gap in the back wall where someone had pulled the Harvia heater out was about 6 inches in diameter. Through it she could see daylight, which meant through it the wind could reach inside and destroy every degree of warmth the insulated walls were trying to hold. 6 inches doesn't sound like much, but in a sealed, insulated space, a 6-inch hole is a catastrophe. It's like wearing a down jacket with no zipper and the front hanging open. The jacket might be rated to 40 below, but the 40 below rating assumes you zip it shut. Leave it open and you've got the world's most expensive vest. She patched it on October 14th. Used a piece of sheet metal she found in the dumpster behind the welding shop, cut roughly round with tin snips Hal loaned her. Silicone caulk from a tube she bought at the Dollar Tree for $1.25. She'd gooped the caulk around the edges of the hole, pressed the sheet metal over it, and held it in place with 4 screws she drove into the cedar framing by hand, using a screwdriver and a lot of patience. Then she sealed the inside too. A square of cardboard cut from a refrigerator box, covered in aluminum foil she bought at the grocery store, taped over the interior side of the patch with duct tape. Foil facing inward. Same principle as the original vapor barrier that was already in the walls. Bounce heat back toward the interior. Don't let it conduct through the metal patch and escape. Problem 2 was the door. The tempered glass sauna door was still in its frame and still latched, but glass is a terrible insulator. About R1 for a single pane. In a sauna running at 180 degrees, that's fine because the heater overwhelms the loss. In a shelter running on body heat alone at 9 below, that single pane of glass is the weakest point in the entire structure. Most of her heat was walking right out the door. She fixed this on October 20th, hung a moving blanket on the inside of the door, doubled over so it was 2 layers thick. The blanket was quilted polyester fill between cotton faces. Maybe R2 per layer, R4 doubled. Then she cut a piece of 1-inch thick white foam board, the kind that comes in sheets at the hardware store, and wedged it between the blanket and the glass. That foam was about R5 by itself. Now the door was going from R1 to somewhere around R9 or R10. Still the weakest point, but no longer a disaster. She left a gap at the bottom of the blanket. About 2 inches. Not by accident. Which brings up problem 3. The one that almost killed her. November 9th, 2024. First night below freezing. 28 degrees. Corrine sealed herself into the barrel with the stovepipe patch in place, the foam and blanket door upgrade installed, and every crack she could find stuffed with strips of flannel torn from one of Earl's old shirts. She was proud of herself. The barrel felt warm. She could sit inside with the door shut, and within 20 minutes her body heat had brought the interior temperature up to something that felt like the low 50s. No heater. No fire. Just her, a sleeping bag, and R15 walls doing what R15 walls do. She fell asleep at maybe 11 o'clock. Woke up at 3 in the morning soaking wet. Her sleeping bag was damp. The foam board on the door was dripping. When she aimed the flashlight at the ceiling, she could see water droplets hanging from the tongue-and-groove cedar like tiny glass beads. Condensation. She breathes out warm, moist air all night. That moisture hits the coldest surface it can find, which is the door glass and the metal patch over the stovepipe hole. It condenses, turns to water, drips. In a sealed, insulated space with no ventilation, a sleeping human will produce enough moisture to soak everything in the enclosure within a few hours. This is the problem that kills people in improvised shelters and nobody talks about. Not the cold, the wet. Because once your sleeping bag is wet, it stops insulating. And once your insulation stops insulating, you're back to R0, which is where you started. Except now, you're also damp. And damp plus cold is the express lane to hypothermia. She opened the door at 3 a.m., stood outside in 26 degrees, shivering, holding a wet sleeping bag. The barrel was no good to her. All that insulation, all that work, and she'd nearly drowned in her own breath. She slept in the warming center the next 2 nights while she tried to figure out what went wrong. Hal told her, not because Hal knew anything about saunas or building science, but because Hal had done drywall in commercial buildings for 30 years, and he knew what happens when you seal up a space and don't give the moisture a way out. You need ventilation, he said. Not a lot. Crack something open at the top, and crack something open at the bottom. Hot air rises, pulls fresh air in from below, pushes the wet air out above. Corinne pointed out the obvious problem with this plan. If she opens vents, cold air comes in, and she's trying to keep cold air out. That's the whole point of the insulation. Opening a vent is like putting a hole in the jacket she just zipped shut. Hal shrugged. You can have a dry 40 degrees or a wet 50. Wet 50 will kill you. Dry 40 won't. She went back to the barrel and found what she needed already built into it. Sauna designers aren't stupid. They've been dealing with steam and moisture for 1,000 years, especially the Finnish ones. The barrel had 2 vents, one low, near where the heater used to sit, about 4 inches square, one high, on the back wall near the ceiling, same size. Both had sliding dampers. She'd sealed them shut with the flannel strips when she was plugging every crack she could find. She opened the top one about an inch, opened the bottom one about an inch, and on November 14th, she tried again. 31 degrees outside. Door shut. Foam and blanket in place. Stovepipe patch sealed. Both vents cracked 1 inch. This time, she put Earl's old cooking thermometer on the bench across from her sleeping spot. At 11 o'clock, when she zipped into the sleeping bag, it read 44 degrees. By midnight, it had crept to 47. By 2 a.m., she woke up briefly, checked it. 49. Dry. The ceiling was dry. The foam board was dry. Her sleeping bag was dry. She'd lost maybe 5 degrees compared to the sealed-up night. Maybe 7. But the air was breathable, and the moisture was leaving through the top vent instead of condensing on her ceiling. She could work with that. The question that drove the rest of the winter was simple. How warm can body heat keep a sealed insulated space with just those 2 vents cracked? Because a human body puts out about the same heat as a 100-watt light bulb running nonstop. Maybe 80 watts while you sleep, 120 while you're awake and moving. That's not nothing. In a small insulated space, that heat accumulates. The barrel had an interior volume of about 250 cubic feet, with R15 walls, a patched ceiling, and the modified door bringing the average insulation up to maybe R12 overall. The math works out. Roughly. She didn't run the math. She ran the thermometer. November 19th, 9 degrees outside. Interior at 3 a.m., 46. November 28th, 2 below 0. Wind chill negative, 20. Interior at 4 a.m., 39. December 5th, 11 below. Interior at 2 a.m., 36. It tracked. The colder it got outside, the colder it got inside. But the gap between the two held steady at around 40 to 50 degrees. Outside went from 9 to negative 11, a drop of 20 degrees. Inside went from 46 to 36, a drop of 10. The insulation was eating half the temperature change, absorbing it, slowing it down. 36 degrees is cold. Nobody's calling that comfortable. But 36 is above freezing. 36 means your water bottle doesn't turn to ice overnight. 36 means your sleeping bag stays dry because the dew point in a ventilated space at 36 degrees is low enough that moisture escapes instead of condensing. 36 means you can sleep instead of shivering. Meanwhile, the tents 40 feet away were the same temperature inside as outside. 9 degrees out, 9 degrees in. Negative 11 out, negative 11 in. Nylon doesn't fight the cold. It observes the cold. It takes notes. It does not intervene. By December, Corinne had made changes that went beyond plugging holes. The benches. The original sauna had 2 tiers of slatted cedar benches running along one side, the way Finnish saunas are set up so you can sit higher where the air is hotter. She pulled the upper bench off and repositioned it as a sleeping platform, laid it flat across the lower bench supports so it was about 18 inches off the floor. Put her sleeping bag on that. Why 18 inches? Because heat rises, the warmest air in the barrel collected at the top of the curve, right under the highest point of the ceiling. At floor level, the air was 5 to 8 degrees colder than at bench height. 18 inches of elevation bought her those degrees back. She covered the sleeping platform with a layer of cardboard, then a foam camping pad, then Earl's old flannel shirts laid flat as a sort of insulating quilt under the sleeping bag. The cardboard blocked conductive heat loss from her body into the wood of the bench. The foam pad added maybe R3. The flannels added another R1 or so. Underneath her body, where she pressed the sleeping bag flat and crushed its loft, those extra layers were the difference between feeling the cold bench and not feeling it. She also did something clever with the floor. The barrel sat on pallets, which created maybe 4 inches of air gap between the bottom of the barrel and the frozen ground. Air is a decent insulator when it's trapped and not moving. That pallet gap was doing some work. But Corinne added to it. She found sheets of that 1-inch foam board at a construction dumpster off 7th Street, cut them to fit the curved floor of the barrel, and laid them down in overlapping pieces. Sealed the seams with duct tape. Now the floor was foam over cedar, over air gap over pallet over frozen ground. Maybe R8 or R9 total. Not as good as the walls, but better than a tent floor by a factor of infinity, basically because a tent floor has the insulation value of a slightly thick piece of paper. The tarp. She draped a blue poly tarp over the back half of the barrel when she first moved in, mostly to keep rain off the stovepipe patch. But the tarp did something she hadn't planned. It created a second air gap over the top of the barrel. Tarp, then an inch or two of dead air, then cedar staves, then mineral wool, then foil, then cedar paneling. That extra air layer probably added R1 to the top of the barrel. Small, but when you're running on body heat, small is real. January was the test. Fargo in January is not a place that tests you casually. It tests you the way a surgeon tests a suture, under maximum stress, with no second chance. The average low in January there is about -4. The wind comes across the Red River flatlands with nothing to stop it from Winnipeg to the warehouse district. Wind chill warnings are so frequent the TV stations don't even lead with them anymore. January 6th, 2025, -14, wind chill -38. Corinne stayed in the barrel. Interior temperature at 4 a.m. 33 degrees, no heat source, wind chill of -38 outside. A 47-degree differential between inside and outside, measured at the coldest hour of the coldest night so far. She layered 2 pairs of socks, thermal underwear under sweatpants, Earl's heavy flannel shirt over a long-sleeve thermal, a wool watch cap she got from the Salvation Army. Inside the sleeping bag, on the platform, with the foam and the flannels and the cardboard underneath her, she slept. Not well, but she slept. The tents didn't make it. The guy 3 spots south, a man in his 20s named Kevin, had his tent pole snap at 2 a.m. The cold makes aluminum poles brittle, and the wind does the rest. He came out holding the broken pole like he couldn't believe it, standing in wind chill that would give you frostbite in 10 minutes on exposed skin, wearing jeans and a hoodie because that's what he had. Kevin came to the barrel. Corinne let him in. 2 bodies in a 250 cubic foot insulated space is 200 watts instead of 100. Interior temperature climbed to 38 within an hour. They sat on opposite benches and didn't talk much. Kevin fell asleep. Corinne listened to the wind shake the tarp and wondered what Earl would think of all this. In the morning, Kevin said the barrel was warmer than his apartment had been when the heat went out 2 years ago. He wasn't exaggerating. A poorly insulated apartment with the heat off in Fargo might hit the mid-20s at floor level. The barrel was running 10 degrees above that on body heat alone. Word got out, not in the way you'd expect, not through social media or a news story. Just the camp. People talking. A woman named Gina, who lived 2 tents down, asked if she could sit in the barrel during the afternoon while Corinne was at the library. Corinne said yes. Gina sat in there for 3 hours reading a paperback with her gloves off. When she came out, she asked Corinne, "Is there something plugged in I didn't see?" There was cedar, mineral wool, aluminum foil, a foam board patch, a moving blanket, and 2 1-inch vent openings. That's it. That's the whole heating system. The shelter outreach woman from Fargo Cass Public Health came by in late January, doing her rounds along the trail. She'd seen the barrel from the road and assumed it was abandoned equipment. When she found out someone was living in it, she was concerned. When Corinne showed her the interior temperature on the cooking thermometer, she was confused. When Corinne explained the wall construction and she actually pulled back the loose paneling to see the mineral wool and the foil, the outreach woman stood there for a long time and didn't say anything. Because what do you say? The system that $1 billion homeless services industry hadn't figured out. This 56-year-old widow with kitchen-scissored hair and electrical tape holding her glasses together had stumbled into in a parking lot behind a bankrupt spa company. Find an insulated box. Get inside. Let the insulation do what insulation does. That's it. That's the genius and the tragedy of it at the same time. The insulation was always there. In the sauna, in the walls of every heated building these people walk past every day. The technology to survive cold has existed for decades. What Corinne found wasn't a new idea. She found an old one that had been thrown away because somebody thought the missing piece was the heater. The heater was never the point. The heater was comfort. The insulation was survival. February came. The night of February 3rd, the one this video opened with, was 9 below zero. The tents collapsed. Kevin's replacement tent, his third of the winter, had a zipper that froze shut. The warming center on 4th Street was at capacity by 10 p.m. and turning people away. Corinne was in the barrel. Thermometer read 34 at 3 a.m. She had the sleeping bag, the flannels, the foam pad, the platform. She'd added one thing since January, a gallon milk jug full of water heated on the Coleman stove to about 140 degrees, sealed tight, wrapped in a flannel shirt, and tucked inside the sleeping bag as a thermomass, basically a very large, very crude hot water bottle. It gave off heat slowly for 5 or 6 hours as the water cooled, boosting her from about 34 to maybe 40 at chest level inside the bag. 9 below zero, 40 degrees at chest level, in a structure with no power, no fuel, and no fire. The people who called her crazy in October weren't calling her anything in February. They were asking if she'd seen any more saunas. She hadn't, but she'd been thinking about why. Why are there abandoned saunas in warehouse lots in Fargo? Because the sauna business is a boom and bust industry in the upper Midwest. A company starts up, imports Cedar from British Columbia, builds barrel saunas in a warehouse, sells them online or through spa dealers. Then the economy hiccups, or the Cedar supply chain hits a snag, or the owner gets in over his head, and the company folds. The built units stay wherever they were built. A 1,600-pound Cedar barrel isn't something you throw in a truck. It takes a forklift. And if nobody owns it anymore, nobody's paying for the forklift. She found one more. Hal found it, actually. A cabin-style unit, not a barrel, sitting behind a storage facility on 25th Street. 8 by 10 feet, flat roof, cedar paneling inside and out. Mineral wool in the walls. Somebody had taken the heater out of this one, too. The door was gone entirely. It had been sitting there for at least 2 winters based on the weathering on the wood. Corinne told a woman named Patricia from the camp about it. Patricia and her teenage daughter moved in on December 30th, hung a tarp over the doorframe, stuffed the gaps, cracked the vents. By mid-January, Patricia reported interior temperatures in the mid-30s on nights when it was 10 below. 2 insulated pods, 2 families sleeping above freezing. No power, no fuel, just the physics of cedar and mineral wool and aluminum foil doing what they were designed to do, long after the heater that was supposed to be the point had been stripped for scrap. Here is what I think people get wrong about being cold, and I think Corinne figured it out in a way she'd never be able to put into words. Everyone thinks warmth is about adding heat. Build a fire, turn on a furnace, burn something, but that's only half of it, and for someone without access to fuel or power, it's the half that doesn't help. The other half is keeping heat from leaving, and your body already makes heat. Constantly, 80 to 120 watts, all day, all night, from the moment you're born until the moment you stop. That heat doesn't need to be generated. It needs to be contained. A tent doesn't contain it. A building does. A sauna, even a broken sauna, is a building. Cedar has the lowest thermal conductivity of any common softwood. The little air cells inside the grain of the wood slow heat transfer down the way speed bumps slow a car. Not by blocking it completely, but by making the trip tedious enough that the heat gives up some of its momentum. Mineral wool does the same thing, except instead of air cells in wood grain, it's air pockets between glass fibers, millions of tiny dead-end corridors, where heat enters and gets lost. The aluminum foil does something different. It bounces radiant heat back. Your body radiates infrared energy like a low-temperature light bulb, and the foil sends that energy back toward you instead of letting it pass through the wall. Cedar, mineral wool, foil, 3 materials. None of them generate heat. All of them slow it down, redirect it, confuse it, trap it. And when the container is small enough, and the insulation is thick enough, and the only heat source is one human body, 51 degrees on a night when it's 9 below zero. Corrine is still in the barrel. It's May now. Fargo thaws out slow. She's been talking to a caseworker about getting into a subsidized apartment, which might happen by fall if the waitlist cooperates and the paperwork goes through and nothing falls apart, which is a lot of ifs for a woman who's used to things falling apart. She still has Earl's flannels, still uses the cooking thermometer, still heats the milk jug on the Coleman stove on nights when the temperature drops below 20, which in Fargo can happen well into April. The barrel smells like cedar and coffee and damp wool and a woman who has been living in 250 cubic feet for 7 months. It doesn't smell good, but it smells like someone's home, and that's different from smelling good. Someone at the camp asked her once what she'd do if she got the apartment. Would she take the barrel? She laughed. You can't take a 1,600-pound cedar barrel up the stairs at the Lincoln Arms. But she'd take the idea that warmth isn't something you make, it's something you keep. That every wall has a number, and that number is the difference between sleeping and shaking, between making it through the night and not. That the most expensive part of staying warm isn't the fire, it's everything around the fire. And when everything around the fire is good enough, you don't even need the fire. Earl would have gotten that. He was a practical man, would have measured the barrel himself, run the numbers on a yellow legal pad, then looked at her over those reading glasses and said something like, well, it's not pretty, but the math works. The cedar holds, the wool slows the cold, the foil pushes the heat back, and the woman inside, the one who lost her husband and her house and her toenails, and 2 winters to the wind before she found a broken wooden barrel in a parking lot, she holds too. She keeps.